Contrarian thinking. It's a term that you hear bandied around quite a lot. But all it really is having the ability inside yourself to think a little bit differently from the norm. A lot of the time, as human beings, we end up acting like sheep in a herd, following each other, following the same trends, the same social and ideological norms, but ultimately we end up with the same outcomes because everyone's doing the same thing. But a lot of the time, we don't critically think about things, about why we're doing things, and why perhaps we should be doing things in a slightly different way if we want better outcomes for ourselves. After all, a lot of our thinking patterns, and that's powered upon us, is for political, financial, or some sort of power struggle where people or institutions are trying to have some sort of control over you. But if you can think differently and you can have contrarian thinking, you're probably going to have a different outcome in life. The first point is to question everything, and that becomes a bit of a habit. Sometimes we take things on board as being the norm, and they might come from a fairly respectable source like a teacher or perhaps one of our parents. But a lot of the time, they've been programmed into a certain sort of thinking, so they're just doing it really without understanding it in any sort of great detail, and they're just passing it on to you and you're just consuming it. So question everything. The next point is to read widely and diversifully. A lot of the time we read, we take on board internet content, we watch TV, videos, DVDs, and they're not really stretching our imagination or making us think particularly critically. But if we have a diverse array of things and information that we take in, we're probably going to question things and think a little bit more critically. And that leads into the next step, which is pure critical thinking. If you want to analyze things, you've got to sort of take it back to the sort of first point. Why is something the way it is? Why does someone want you to do something? Why does someone want to believe something? And you take it back one step further and one step further till as far back as you possibly can. You can probably understand where that originated from. And then you can take it the other way to think, well, what will be the outcomes and the consequences? And there's usually some sort of ulterior motive or perhaps some sort of gain for someone else. And that really makes you think about whether it's in your best interest to believe that. The next point is to embrace failure and rejection. Now, sometimes you're going to try new things, adopt things that might not work, like wearing some sort of ridiculous shirt or perhaps a pair of trousers that are too tight. And someone might say, that looks absolutely ridiculous. But you've worn it, you've given it a go, you're not following the norms. And then afterwards, you can reflect on it and think, perhaps I should have worn a more loose fitting pair of pants. And then you think you can take that on board and accept the failure and move on. But unless you try, you're never going to really know. And the final point is to seek out contrarian role models. These are people like Galileo or someone who actually went against the societal norm or against authority. They were the crazy ones that pushed the boundaries and got different things done and highlighted different alternatives and probably changed the world in a little bit or maybe even a lot. But they had that ability to think differently and have that contrarian thinking pattern in their own mind. So to go over those 5 points again: question everything, read and consume things more widely, practice critical thinking, question things, try and understand why, embrace failure, try new things. And if something goes completely catastrophically wrong, it's probably not that bad. And seek out contrarian role models who've done it before and see how they ended up with a different way of thinking about the world. And with that, your way of contrarian thinking is probably going to be a lot better.